The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or to view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
A general comment is, by and large, I thought you guys did a great job. Your learning outcomes were, for the most part, specific, measurable, and realistic. The biggest problem I think I had was the biggest problem that you had kind of on average was the idea of the learning outcomes really have to be measurable. So if you use the word like appreciate, it's not measurable. So that's something to remember. If you use words like discuss, it's potentially measurable, but you need to make sure that you set up a venue for students to discuss. Like you can't just say you'll be able to discuss that and assume that they'll be able to discuss it. That if that's in your learning outcome, you have to set up some venue for them to discuss and you to know what they're discussing. And then the two biggest things that come up, or the two most problematic words that come up, and I compliment you all because you did a great job. Nobody used understand, so that was awesome. But the other thing, there's words like explain and describe, which are perfectly good words to use in a learning outcome. But you have to make sure that when you say students will explain the ideal gas law, they'll be able to explain the ideal gas law. Well, do you know that they're really explaining it in the true sense of that word, that they have actually internalized what it means and they're really explaining it? Or are they just kind of spitting back maybe what they read in a book, a definition that they read in a book? So you have to make sure that you set up a situation wherein they really are explaining and they're not just remembering. So it's a great word to use, but you have to make sure that they're using it in the right context. Same thing for describe. You can imagine that has the same issues. Describe, da-da-da-da-da. Well, are you sure they're doing the describing, or are they just remembering somebody else's description and writing it down? One good way around that is to sort of tweak the parameters a little bit. To say, in a world where there's no oxygen, what do you expect this kind of, this organism to look like, given that it has to run really fast or something? So kind of come up with alternate realities that then actually force students to sort of transfer and then re-explain. That can be helpful. That can be really, really helpful. I remember once in a kinetics class, we had been deriving the critical nucleus size for growth. And it's all based on a critical radius. And then on the exam, the guy said, okay, they don't grow as spheres, they grow as rectangular boxes. So then all of a sudden we had to look at the ratio of the length to the height of the box or something. So that really wasn't just we were just remembering a solution or remembering a method. We had to actually think about what it meant and then kind of reapply it. So just think about how you can get students to really describe, explain, derive even, because you can memorize a derivation. But if you really want them to derive it, what does that mean? I mean, how are you going to test that? So those are generally the biggest problems people have with learning outcomes. But by and large, you all did a great job. If you came in late, I'll give you learning outcomes at the end of class. If you looked at the wiki, and this is a test to see who looked at the wiki, I had suggested you bring a web-enabled device if you had one. If you have one. And that's because I wanted to set up something called Backchannel. The topic today is on active learning. And so this is just one method that might help your students, especially if you have a big class. So we don't really need it in this class, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to play with it a little bit. It was designed for conferences, actually, but it works pretty well, I think, in classes. So if you log into here, this is the URL, or if you go to if you have our wiki page bookmarked, there's a link on the wiki page if you just want to link to it that way. And then at any point in the class, you can type a question in. And if you're on the page, you can see other people's questions. You can upvote and downvote their questions. And I will take a break in the middle when you're doing some other things and read what people have posted and then get back to you. So it's an opportunity for students to interact who may be a little more shy, who may not want to. I don't think we need that in this classroom. I don't think there's any one of you that isn't willing to share your ideas, which is great, but this may be something that's of interest to you. Before we jump into the topic today, active learning, there were a couple mudcard questions that I just wanted to talk about. One was students, sometimes students may nod off during class. And if it's a big class, there's probably not a lot you can do about it. If you do enough active learning, though, that will make them wake up. I mean, especially pair activities or activities where they have to talk to one or two other people, or two or three other people. It's pretty hard to be asleep during those. So, and you'll see we're going to do something called a lightning round later on, and it's virtually impossible to be asleep during that. So you want to make sure that it's worth the student's time to actually be in class and be awake for it, and active learning can play a huge role in that. Sometimes people are tired, they stayed up too late for whatever reason, and you can't control everybody in your class, but you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can do to keep them engaged. And if it's just one student every now and then, you probably don't want to take it personally. It's probably not you. If the whole class is falling asleep, then it's probably a good opportunity to rethink your strategies. Somebody asked if there were good times of day to have a lecture. And part of it is part of it is your schedule. Sometimes you can pick that, and sometimes you really don't have much control over when you choose to teach your class. People do say that students, undergrads, people between the ages of 18 and 21 are not particularly interested in being up at 8 or 9 in the morning. But again, you may not have any control over that. Generally speaking, that's a pretty low time for people. So if you want to take that into consideration, you might. But it depends as much on you as the students. If you're going to be, if you're going to be really tired at 4 o'clock, but they're just waking up, then don't teach at 4 o'clock. Maybe don't teach at 4 o'clock. And the last one was guiding readings. If you just put a lot of readings up, students may not know where to focus their attention until after the class. So there are reading questions, reading guides that you can post. Read such and such and and think about how you might explain this, that, or the other thing. And then there's also sort of pre-class questions you can ask that they might derive, that they may have to pull from the readings to answer. So the concept of just-in-time teaching, the idea that students do a reading and then they actually have to answer questions on the reading before they come to class and submit their answers. So there's a whole procedure around that. It can be very, very effective. You can do it for a large class. There's strategies and techniques to sort of streamline the amount of time you put into it. But it does force them to do the reading, and it does guide at some level what they read. And that's a great approach, and I'm happy to talk more about that at another time or later or offline. Okay? I did go to the Teaching with Technology conference, the Teaching Professor Technology conference, and they were giving out little ribbons to stack on your badge, and this was a prominent one. It's in the syllabus, which I thought was just crazy timely because of a couple weeks ago. So if you want one of these to stick somewhere, and then they also had one I tweet, which was sort of weird. But anyway, I brought those back. Anybody wants them? Sometimes my computer doesn't wake up. There we go. So let's pretend that instead of the class Active Learning today, I decided I was going to teach you how to juggle. Okay? And I said, all right, here's the equation for how to juggle. And here's the variables, F, D, V, N, and H, which are like ball in the air, ball in a hand, time a hand is vacant, number of balls, number of hands. And this is this handy-dandy equation, which if you balance it out, that it describes the juggling process. And for those of you that are visual learners, I have a graph here, a yellow ball, a blue ball, and a pink ball. And then you can see that shows the path of the balls. If you remember from physics, there's the equations of motion in the x direction and the y direction. So I think I probably did a pretty good job of teaching you how to juggle. right? No. Did a terrible job of teaching you how to juggle. I didn't even come close to teaching you how to juggle. And if I were to give you a test, let's say, and I were to measure whether now you could juggle, I guarantee that some of you would be able to juggle. And I could say, I did a great job teaching you how to juggle. But I didn't. If you knew how to juggle coming in, presumably you still know how to juggle. I did no harm, I think. However, if you didn't know how to juggle coming in, you don't know how to juggle now. So why is this here now? Why did I bother to do this stupid thought experiment right now?
Because this is clearly how most classes are taught. You know, obviously, it would be easier to have a ball and show us how to play active learning as opposed to just showing the theory behind it and ending there.
Right. And I think a lot of times we really do, in science and engineering classes, we really put up a lot of equations. And then it's not like we expect somebody to do something like, physically with them, but we expect them to be able to manipulate the equations, transfer the equations, apply the equations. And we never really talked about that. We talked about the equations. So it's a real call in my mind for us to think about what it is we really want students to be able to do, and then make sure that they're doing stuff to teach them that helps them learn how to do that. And I know you all read the readings, and that they talk a lot about active learning. There's a few things about techniques for active learning. There's a few things about whys of active learning. There's some data for why active learning works. But I'm guessing that there's a range of sort of buy-in at this point from you guys. Like, I don't think it's worth it, or I don't really know. So for the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of class, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pretend that you were part of a department, the STEM department. Call it whatever you want, whatever field you want. And there's a proposal that your department should commit funds to train professors and develop resources, the resources necessary for the adoption and ongoing use of active learning techniques in all courses, and the target date is 2017. So you've got a year to get all courses kind of up to speed with active learning stuff introduced into these classes, and with a plan for how to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just count off 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to ask you to form a group. If you're 1, go with the 1 group. 2, go with the 2 group. 3, go with the 3 group. Okay, and you're going to have to physically move. All right. So just remember your number. 1,
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, it doesn't matter that they're not the same size. Okay, can we get all the 1s, let's say all the 1s up here, all the 2s here, and all the 3s there? And I'll tell you what to do in just a sec. So if you're group number 1, you have to adopt the position that you are pro. You are going to push for the adoption of this resolution. All right, and you have to come up with a set of arguments and a set of reasons why it's a good thing. I don't care what you think personally. I don't care if you think active learning is the worst idea ever. For the purposes of this debate, you need to pretend you're totally into it. Okay, and you need to come up with some good arguments why. 2 are against it. Again, I don't care how you feel personally, but come up with some good, solid arguments why you should not do this. Okay. Against. You do not want it. No. Group number 3, you got a little bit of time, but get to know each other. And you're going to hear the arguments. You're going to hear a case presented by the pro people, the con people, and then you are going to deliberate and decide what's going to happen in your department. Okay, you guys are the deciders. That's an American political joke, but we'll let that go. And you guys get this lovely microphone. All right, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes for this, okay? So be ready to kind of share your views. You got about maybe 2 or 3 minutes of a spiel of proof, and then we'll do one exchange of debate, and then the deciders will decide.
And then we can now decide.
So as deciders,
That
what
way,
are-
like the judge,
What values of momentum can you measure? And the answer is anything.
Someone from each
But-
group to make a statement
but it's like the
about,
weird-
that puts forth the side you're supposed to defends the side you're supposed to defend. So we'll start with the pros. So, someone from your group ready to talk? Pros? All right, Michelle.
Okay. So we are pro-active learning, and part of the basis for thinking that active learning is important is that we believe that without active learning, the professor usually just resorts to lecturing, and we think that lectures are not effective. Students don't learn simply because the material is presented to them. And lecturing wastes resources because you could be lecturing to 1,000, but only 15 students may be reached. And if you use active learning instead of lecturing, you can make sure the students are paying attention, you can check that they're understanding, you can know what they are getting and what they're not getting. We also feel that active learning is a life skill, and that if students they learn by doing things, and they learn by talking to each other and by going through a process and solving problems, that they can take this skill to outside of the classroom later in society, that it will benefit society if you have students who are used to being active learners and who know how to solve problems that way. And we also think that in the sort of the end, the big point that we have is that you remember things that you use. If you learn something, if it goes in one ear and out the other, if you don't actually use it, you're not going to remember it. If you're not forced to actually work through a problem and really think about it and use it in the classroom, that you're much less likely to actually hold on to that information. So these are all the reasons why we think that we should promote active learning in our department.
Okay, thank you very much. The con, or I guess I should say the not con. Whatever. Anyway, group 2.
Do you want to do?
Okay. Yeah, we start with a basic question, and the question is, why do we want to change what is working? We are training our students; they are getting jobs. The professors are doing well; they are attracting grants. The rating of the university from QS is okay. So why do we want to change what is working? So that's the first question. Now, the first thing is that if you want to go about this, it's going to consume a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of money, and there is scarcity of funds. We want funds for our research. We want to buy equipment for the laboratory. We want to hire scientists. We want to hire postdocs. So why do we want to change? Where do we get this fund? If we divert funds to the training of professors, then there's going to be little or no fund for all this research work. And secondly, the effort to train professors is likely to be very huge. You know, professors are used to this method of teaching, and as a result, they will not want to change. So it's going to be a lot of time changing them, and we are not even sure if we try to train them, whether they are going to be able to do it at the end of the day. And thirdly, we are not sure whether the stakeholder will be happy. What about the alumni that are very much used to the method of teaching? What about the parents? Are they not going to go against us? Would they not say that the professor no longer teach? You know, just come to the class, give them group work like this without teaching, without writing. Then the professor are no longer teaching, then they are just going to collect their salary. And then there's going to be constraint on time to cover syllabus. For instance, you are spending a lot of money doing group work, individual work, this and that. So how do you complete your syllabus? You have about 20 topics to cover in a semester. And by the time you start active learning, how are you going to cover about 50% of them? Then you push all other topics for the student to read at their home. So it's not going to work. We should just drop the idea. What happens if you have a very large class? You have a class of 500. How do you want active learning to be operative? How do you want to grip them? It's good here because we are just about 15 or less than 20. By the time you have 500 students, 500 students in a class, it becomes very difficult for you to have active learning. Difficult for the professor to control classes, and of course, difficult for you to really get something concrete out of the whole thing. So, my fellow guys and professors, I think it's not necessary. The system is working. Let it continue to work this way. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let each group ask one question or a set of clustered questions to the other group. The other group can answer them, and then the deciders can ask a couple questions, and then we'll let them deliberate. Okay, so group number one, like to ask some questions to group number two, or make some comments. Go ahead.
Yeah, I listened to you speak, and I want to ask you. You are saying that the system is changing. It is changing because what actually the status quo isn't delivering. So that is why we're adopting active learning, and it's proven from a research perspective that is actually letting more students learn more materials faster and more effectively. So what do you think about that?
Okay, I would like to reply you by saying, even the research shows that the student that is good is good. There are people that can learn under any circumstance. So why can't we just concentrate on getting those students? And then your presentation didn't mention anything about the funds, because the whole idea is to defend the proposal. Do we spend divert funds to this new program? And that is a very big issue. You have to concentrate on the question, which is the diversion of funds away from research. So if we can get the good students and they can learn under any environment, and it's working already, go ahead with it.
So you want to throw away the baby with the bathwater? If you have 20 students in a class and you have 5 active learners, and then you want to discard the 15 that wouldn't. This program is geared towards getting each one of the students in the class to participate, and I think it's more cost effective if you could get all the 20 students to learn and to learn actively. I think that will pay itself off at the end of the.
The problem there is that you have to face the proposal. This is 2017. There's a lot of change within a very short time. The proposal itself is what we're against.
Our department could be 3 people big. I don't know how big the department is.
It's you guys.
It depends on how you decide. But then the issue there is that you're going to train professors. Professors are already stuck in their ways, and you spend all this money, and it's very short time. You divert people from the labs, and money from the labs within this very short time to train them on something we don't know if they are going to buy into it.
So I think your assumption is that you're like, okay, we're diverting funds from labs and research, but you never once said you're diverting funds from anything related to the students. You're thinking of it from the perspective, like the professor perspective, but really professors are here to teach their students, and you're like, oh, we're taking money away from the research, from the lab equipment, from all these different things that sound great to the professor, but have literally nothing to do with the student's learning experience or the student's experience on campus. And from the student's perspective, that's really frustrating when that's all the professors care about. And that's what makes the difference between like a good professor and a crap professor, is like one who cares. And I think if you want a professor to care, oftentimes they're like willing to like make the effort that is needed to like change their teaching style, or like do whatever it is that's necessary to like have their kids interested and engaged in the same material that this professor loves. And so you keep talking about like diverting funds, but you never once mentioned maybe diverting these funds away from this one teaching initiative to a different teaching initiative. So just keep that in mind.
So the problem is that we are looking at the proposal itself. The time 2017, this is already the end of 2015. So that means you're going to do this. This is by 2017. That means you're going to do it by 2016. We're not against active learning. We're against that.
You're against it.
The proposal, we are against this pro and against this proposal. So for this proposal, we are against this proposal because we're going to divert, because you never mentioned anything about the funds and the resources, and that is why we are against the proposal. Okay. And also the people that we're going to train are people we're not even sure that the training is going to work.
All right, I'm going to take, because you actually did ask a question, so I'm going to count that for your question. Did you have another separate one? Adrian, you look like you want to ask a question.
Yeah, actually I was just curious, okay, so if this initiative is really great, It looks like a lot of this research has been done since the 80s. Why isn't it adopted? Why are we having this conversation now in 2015?
Okay. I think we should look back at this issue of a lecturing system that we are using now. It started when there was no printing. Lecturers then, they get the material, they read to students. So lecturing is a Latin word that means reading. Now, since then, now we have printing, we have information readily available that people can get on their own, read on their own, and develop something. So there is need for us to change to new system, because the whole system that that motivated lecturing has changed. So then we have to change.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the deciders who now have to do stuff. They've been resting for 15 minutes, but now they're So you have questions for each of the groups?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Great arguments on both sides. I found it interesting when you talked about the large classes. So my first question is for this group. So how would active learning apply to a large class? I mean, the proposal is that it's for all courses, and so are there courses where this doesn't lend itself to?
Even in the classes of 700, 800 students here, they still do active learning for the freshmen. You put your questions, oftentimes professors have you talk to your partners. So like they'll pose a question, everyone will like click on their like answer, and then they'll be like, okay, now go back, talk to the person sitting next to you, and then you'll like vote again in like 2 minutes. So I think that's just one example of how you can engage a class for a lot of students.
And to add to that, actually, it's also been found out that when peers speak to themselves, they even learn the material better than when the expert, who may have lost touch to what it could be like to learn from a student's perspective, so peers speak to themselves and teach themselves even faster than the expert who is in front of them.
Yeah, I have a comment for the against group. Yeah, you mentioned that you don't require to create active learning because some students are very smart, they get it right. But don't you think that education is a right of every child and they deserve to have a good shot of it? So why do you want to pull one child out of it because he's not smart enough?
Just to answer, I think we are pushing for the best education. We believe that is the traditional way. We think that active learning can happen outside the classroom. Students can, this is the way it's worked for 300 plus years over at Harvard, one of the best universities, MIT for 100 plus years. We think that essentially it's working, and the reason we're having this conversation right now is because it has worked. So we want to continue that legacy. We think that every system's going to have problems, and if you analyze any system, you're going to find issues, and there are certainly some smaller inefficiencies within the lecture, but by and large, it's trusted and it works.
I want to add on what Andrew's. So I think we are not pushing those less smart kids away because they can learn from each other outside the class. We just want to say that during the lecture, that it's more efficient if the professor is lecturing and then giving all the information.
Okay, as a follow-up to that, sorry, if professors come to the class and just give the theory and go away and the smart kids get it, then how do you measure the professor's performance? How do you think about, say, something like students' evaluation on educational quality? How do you measure that?
Well, you don't really need to, you don't need the professor to be extremely active and do active teaching in the class before students can actually get what they need. You have a bunch of homeworks, you have a bunch of test questions, exam questions that students, whether they like it or not, they will surely be forced to read those things. And by the time they come back, they come back learning. A lot of graduates from MIT, they are really doing well. About 25% start up their own business, and probably 90-something% get job immediately they finish. Then, what are you talking about? The system is working. That's what we are saying. And the evaluation is also great. The evaluation is done on the type of textbook. The more the lecturer delivers their lecture. So these are the things that are actually evaluated in the evaluation process, and it has been great, and we want it to continue.
I just want to. Okay, so we addressed the measuring impact, and that goes for both. But for the active learning, how do we quantify how much active learning needs to go into these different classrooms in the department? So how will we ensure the appropriate amount has been implemented in different classrooms? Oh, basically, like how much active learning needs to go into a classroom to create change or to like strengthen our student learning?
How much has to go in, or how are you going to make sure the professors are doing it?
Both, I guess, is sort of the question, right? Is like if there's a professor that's more on the lecture side that might throw one thing pair share in and call it a day, you know. So how do we ensure the appropriate active learning techniques and the quantity are there for the classrooms?
I think we'd have to go back to the research and see how much, whether it's if 30% of the time needs to be spent on active learning activities, or to see what has been proven, because the active learning has been proven to be effective, but we would have to go back and make sure that we set a standard, that it's, if it is 30% of the time or 70% of the time, and that I think oversight from the department would be important, and that the leadership in the department will have to sit in on classes, and as part of the training of the professors, there has to be training, but then there has to be someone to observe them in the class, give feedback. The training has to be ongoing. It's not just a 3-hour seminar on this is what active learning is and this is what you should do. I think it's going to be a long-term investment in the professor training, and that someone's going to have to check up and give them feedback, and then they can adjust from there.
All right, I'm sure that we could all day, but I'm going to give the deciders 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes to kind of talk to each other and come up with a decision. All right, the committee has met, and now they're going to determine your fate in this department. So.
Does this mic work? Is this on? Do I need to use the mic?
Yeah.
Good here. All right, great. Well, thank you again for your arguments. Certainly, the panel felt that the pro arguments in terms of the benefits of active learning are great, and we definitely support that. However, given the time frame in this proposal is very aggressive, it would be extremely disruptive. Also, the amount of funds that we think that it would take to implement this would be very high without any proven way to measure success. So what we are willing to do is commit funds to a pilot program where we can then measure what the success will be, and then make a decision next year as to whether or not we invest for the rest of the departments.
Well played.
You see, they've dodged the reality.
All right. So I hope you found this exercise useful. I just want to debrief on the exercise itself, why we bothered to do it. It took probably 45 minutes of time to do it, but I made a decision that would be useful. So what did we get out of this exercise? What was the point?
Well, you have to think about if it's worth it or not. It's worth time. And also, I assume this conversation must happen a lot in the department, especially as you measure the student outcomes from classes as they go through the program.
Mm-hmm.
I assume this has to be debated quite a bit, internally and externally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Other reasons we engaged in this?
Okay, I think it gives everybody the opportunity to think deeply about the subject matter, and also, even if you are against or you're for something, you have to have a deeper knowledge to be able to bring out the real points salient issues that others will not see ordinarily by just seeing this thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Teslim, you want to add to that?
I think this is, the topic is active learning. And what we've just demonstrated is active learning practice.
Right. Yes, exactly. And the idea, but really the idea, to Gordon's point, the idea that it can be very, very useful for you to have students take an arbitrary position and argue it, because they will learn things, they will think about things that they would not have thought about otherwise. And it's usually not a good idea to say, okay, everybody that thinks this, go over here. Everybody that thinks this, go over here. Because all that does is sort of reinforce what people think already. And maybe it's not completely correct. So this is often a very good technique when there's sort of two clear viewpoints or two clear sides, and you want students to really engage with that. And exactly, we could have had a discussion, or I could have had PowerPoint slides that said, here are the good things, here are the pros with active learning. Bum, 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 bum. Here are the cons of active learning. Bum, 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 bum. And that would have taken, just to kind of come out of my neutral position here, that would have taken probably 4 minutes, right? Instead, we took 35 or so, 40 minutes. But I think you probably engaged with some of the ideas and concepts a little bit deeper because you had to come up with it yourself. Okay? So yes, all those reasons. It does come up often. People are discussing it, and it's not so clear cut. There's not a right answer, and you're going to want to kind of say, okay, well, we'll do it by 2019, or we'll do it, but we won't do that. There's going to be deals and all those kinds of things, and that's okay. It's okay that there's not a right answer. But that was the point of this exercise. So that served as our discussion for active learning, but you guys did it. I didn't do anything.
And that buttresses the point that active learning is the way to go.
Well, thank you. Yes, this is very meta. This is very meta here. Yeah, and I did have to feel a little bit bad when you're like, what? That we're going to do all the work and the lecturer's just going to sit back and not do anything. And I took it personally, but no, it's okay. One thing I wanted to bring up is if you haven't read the Scott Freeman article, it's in the reading list for today. It shows, let me bump to it. It shows essentially these results. He did a meta-analysis of 225 studies on active learning, or on classes that used active learning. And they showed a 12% decrease in the failure rate in classes that used active learning. And so I was telling the pro group that what they say in the paper is that if it had been a clinical drug trial and 12% of the people on the drug were having a better outcome than the people on the placebo, they would have had, or the people on the control, they would have had to stop the trial and give everyone the drug. So, in the sense of why we're doing, why we're still lecturing, well, that's, to me, one of the biggest compelling reasons for why we should be doing more active learning. 12% of the students are going to pass the class. I mean, on average, normalized. And they actually considered both like experienced lecturers who were just lecturing, people that were considered to be good lecturers that were just lecturing, as well as like graduate students who were the first-time teachers but were using active learning. So they looked at they mixed up all sorts of outcomes, and active learning the data is pretty conclusive, and this isn't the only study that shows it. So there are definitely issues, there are definitely implementation issues, there are definitely sticking points, but it's something that I think we can't ignore.
Yeah, I just want to add that it's not only that we have 12% decrease in the failure rate, we also have a big shift in the letter grade that students get. For instance, more people shift from grade C to grade B, and from B to A, and then B to C, and things like that. Right. So that's really significant as well.
So I just want to not have learning outcomes. But I did want to have the discussion before I even introduced them. So I think you'll be able to explain the impact of active learning exercises in the classroom. You've already started to do that. And then you'll be able to identify and develop active learning exercises that you'll want to use, and you'll be able to think about how you might use them. So I think pretty attainable learning outcomes. I'm going to show this slide a lot throughout the rest of the time, but it's this, remember, it's constructive alignment. We've seen this diagram before, but the beauty of some of these active learning techniques is that they're formative assessments of students' understanding, of students' learning. And so they're actually activities that happen in the class, but they're also measures, formative measures of whether students are learning or not. So if somebody had come up with a really terrible argument, or it was clear that nobody had read any of the papers on the active learning research, then I would know that from this debate, right? I know what you've read and what you haven't read, and what you're thinking about and what you're not thinking about. And I get a good sense for whether or not you know it and how much and how well you know it, and so do you. And we'll see that a little bit more in these other situations, where if you get a clicker question wrong, or you get a multiple choice question wrong, or that you can't participate in the lightning round, then you know that you got to step up to the plate, or you need to try something different, or you're not really getting it. So you get information, the learner gets information, and the teacher gets information.
Yeah, I just thought that was really powerful in the readings as well. They mentioned that students who, when they get in the group sections, if it's clear they really are getting a lot of things wrong, they know they need to kind of step up. And that's in a different way, I think, than getting a bad grade on a paper and you kind of know the average distribution or whatever, or the professor says you're wrong, but when you know that the people sitting right next to you are getting it and you're not, that really, I think, will kind of push the student forward to do something.
Right. Right. I mean, it's news you can use, right? It's information, and then you're not being penalized. You're not in trouble. It's not affecting your grade if you act on it, right? If you take the information and use it. So that's why I think that's the beauty of it. There are many active learning techniques, and if you looked at, there's the website from University of South Florida has just, I think it's close to 200 techniques for what you might do. I'm doing a bit of a sort of, I call it the foie gras method. You know how they make foie gras? They force feed the goose. So I'm going to give a lot, and we're going to do a lot of different active learning things in this session. It's a little bit comical, sort of. I know it's kind of funny how many we're trying to cram into 2 hours, but I'm going to try to do that. So we'll do some of these. And we can talk about any one of them in particular, but a nice one to get students in the frame of your class is they come in and they have 5 minutes before you do anything to sort of write down what they thought was the most interesting part of the reading, or answer a certain question related to the reading, or solve a problem, or whatever it is. You give them a prompt, you sit down, you focus them, and then and then they're off. I do want to just focus on the word active for just a second. It may help you to think about active and interactive learning. There's all sorts of ways to chop it up, and at some level it's semantics, but at some level it isn't. So students can be active if they're sitting by themselves thinking about something and writing something down or solving a problem. That is active learning. They don't have to be talking to each other. You can do active learning in a class of 3,000 people. Stop and think, answer this question. That's active learning. That's way more than happens in a lot of classes. Interactive learning generally implies that students are talking to each other. And that's the most general categorizations you can get, active, interactive. So we're going to do a bunch of stuff with clickers or plickers, these things. But there's some other techniques you can do. You can put up a graph or an image, and you could say, okay, somebody come up and show me the grain boundary in this picture. Show me a triple junction. Show me where the building, the crack in the building started. Show me whatever. And you pass the pointer. And then you have the student who has the pointer come up with another question and pass it to somebody else. So that's a nice kind of technique that takes the responsibility off of the teacher. And so you're not picking on students. We've been doing mud cards, think, pair, share. We're going to do a lightning round. I'll talk a little bit more about Jigsaw later on. And if time allows, I'll show you a demo I did on diffusion using the students as the atoms. All right. Sometimes if you're trying to ease in active learning kind of slowly into your class, you don't want to do too much. You want to think about these short time things that don't require huge disruptions. If you want to go back to your seats, you can. Maybe I should let you guys do that. So you know what we'll do? While they're taking a break, I'm going to demo the beach ball. So this is the beach ball technique. So when you catch the ball, I'd like you to tell me if you've had any experiences with active learning in classes that you've taken. You can't count this one. All right.
Yeah, I had active learning in my electricity and magnetism class, and that was they called it theory.
Oh, right.
And it's like very polarized, the people reporting against it, especially the students. But so we basically had pairs of, tables of 9, and then within that table we had groups of 3. And each of those would be a problem-solving group. So we'd have like 4 problems to solve per 2-hour class period, and that would be going onto the board and doing it by themselves. And then the teacher at the end revealing the answer and telling us how to go through it. And for my group, at least, there was always, or at my table, there was always this one person who would write every single time.
3,000 people. Stop and answer this question. That's active learning. That's way more than happens in a lot of classes. Interactive learning generally implies that students are talking to each other. And that's the most general categorizations you can get, active, interactive. So we're going to do a bunch of stuff with clickers or plickers, these things. But there's some other techniques you can do. You can put up a graph or an image, and you could say, okay, somebody come up and show me the grain boundary in this picture. Show me a triple junction. Show me where the, show me where the crack in the building started. Show me whatever. And you pass the pointer. And then you have the student who has the pointer come up with another question and pass it to somebody else. So that's a nice kind of technique that takes the responsibility off of the teacher. And so you're not picking on students. We've been doing mud cards, think, pair, share. We're going to do a lightning round. I'll talk a little bit more about Jigsaw later on. And if time allows, I'll show you a demo I did on diffusion using the students as the atoms. All right. Sometimes if you're trying to ease in active learning kind of slowly into your class, you don't want to do too much. You want to think about these short time things that don't require huge disruptions. If you want to go back to your seats, you can. Maybe I should let you guys do that. So you know what we'll do? While they're taking a break, I'm going to demo the beach ball. So this is the beach ball technique. So when you catch the ball, I'd like you to tell me if you've had any experiences with active learning in classes that you've taken. You can't count this one. All right.
Yeah, I had active learning in my electricity and magnetism class, and that was they called it theory.
Oh, right.
And it's like very polarized, the people reporting against it, especially the students. But so we basically had pairs of, tables of 9, and then within that table we had groups of 3. And each of those would be a problem-solving group. So we'd have like 4 problems to solve per 2-hour class period, and that would be going onto the board and doing it by themselves. And then the teacher at the end revealing the answer and telling us how to go through it. And for my group, at least, there was always, or at my table, there was always this one person who would write every single time. And I feel like that detracted from active learning. It worked better for others.
Right. I mean, it's definitely polarized. Students really are not. I think we talked a little bit about this when we did some of the learning theories. But students really are polarized about whether they like it or not. The data, there's been some pretty good analysis of like learning, measuring how much students learned and then how much they retain and all that kind of stuff. And when you go through that, students seem to learn more and retain more in the active learning format, even though they really, at least half of them don't like it at all. So it's kind of an interesting commentary, but yeah, that's a great story. So why don't you give the ball a toss, Kathleen, and then, there you go. All right, and no, you have to answer a question. Have you ever experienced an active learning in a classroom besides this class, and how did it work or not work?
I wouldn't say yes to that.
Okay.
It's definitely the traditional method, sit in front, face-to-face lecture.
Okay.
And that's where it ends.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Give a toss. Toss to anyone. Are we going to get the same answer from all of you? I mean, if it's it.
Same question?
Yeah, same question.
Okay. Yeah, I have. Because I did some studies in Sweden.
Oh, okay.
That's the way, most of the time, that's the way they teach in Sweden. So for some classes, especially the higher level classes, call them D-level classes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they use active learning.
Great. And students buy into it? They're okay with it? They work at it? Or
culturally, they tend to veer towards active learning. So
okay.
It's more accepted.
Right. And that's a very interesting point, right? The idea that it can be kind of a cultural thing, right? That if everybody else is doing it or it's expected then that's what you do, right? So some of these changes, there's a kind of an incubation period before they actually take off, and they're kind of widely accepted. But.
In fact, in Denmark, I think that's the only way they teach.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty active. I have a colleague or a friend who works at the University of Copenhagen, and all new faculty have to take a year-long course on teaching. Like no matter what department, physics, math, a year-long, like the faculty, and here you could never force the faculty to do anything. So it's pretty interesting that they've been doing it for so long.
Is it the way that professors, like their role as actual teachers is viewed? They
Mm-hmm.
ever sit it seriously? Like people like Harvey Mudd or something, I think definitely like trying to enforce like a teaching class would be a lot more receptive than if you tried to like enforce that here.
Right,
where
right.
Teaching isn't necessarily the focus.
Right. But there, it's a good research university. I mean, on the teaching side, that's the norm. That's the expectation. Yeah.
But what about requiring, I know it's hard when you have professors who've been doing what they're doing for 25, 30, 40 years. It's hard to get them to adopt new techniques, but I think that requiring things, the faculty that you can require things of are the new faculty who have no power yet.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, if the tenured system, the requirements for tenure don't change, then asking them to take on new, you guys should try to active learning, revamp this course, right? And then they don't get tenure, right? So it really has to be a whole systemic change where the department buys in, the school buys in, the university buys in and said, okay, these are the criteria for tenure, and in that is you have to use active learning, or you have to, that's where it would have to get changed. Otherwise, you can't expect people that aren't tenured to do it. I mean, you shouldn't. Let's give the ball one more toss. Oh!
So, it's been a long time since I've been in a classroom. I would say in like a sort of regular classroom, I don't think that I've been in a class that does active learning, but I have taken courses that are largely like lab courses, where, like a mouse embryology course, where you have 15 minutes of lecture, and then you go into the lab and you do it. And the professor will walk around and help you with the technique, but like you're actually there with the mice, and you're
Right.
actually doing something. And then, does that count?
Yeah, no, lab courses are kind of can be their own genre, but there has been this movement to take, that's a little bit of what Thiel does at sort of a more simple level. And there's a little bit of lecture, and then students are supposed to answer some questions or do something, and then they come back together. So, and there's a Studio Labs at WPI has that same format where they're built, the classrooms are built with like lab benches, so students sit at lab benches and see a lecture. And then they do some experiments. They're kind of mini experiments. It's not whole mouse, dissection. But they do a mini experiment, and then they report back, and there's an interchange like that. So there are some blending of the two. Often what people do in labs is it's different, and usually that's a good lab is fabulous, right? Good lab is fabulous, which is another argument for why active learning is good, right? Because everybody thinks back about, oh, that lab course was so great, I learned so much, I did so much, and yet that's the lab course, and then we have the lecture, right? So it's an interesting comment, but yeah. Okay, so that was the beach ball, and you see, you guys got to throw the ball at other students, so I didn't have to pick on everybody. I didn't have to call on people or pick on people. I had a little demo here about why it's important just if you ask a question, or you ask students if there are any questions or what questions they have. And that's generally a better phrase. What questions do you have? It's more welcoming, right? As opposed to saying, okay, who's stupid enough? Who's not following me? Right? Say, okay, what are the questions? It's a more welcoming phrase. But the idea of waiting, right? So here, if I click on this little guy, you should hear 30 seconds of music. So imagine you ask a question, 30 seconds for people to think about it and formulate an answer. This is what 30 seconds feels like of sort of dead time. Well, there'll be music. That's not part of it. Okay. So did that feel like a long time? I know we had a little break there. But that feels like a long, especially when you're standing up here, it feels like a long time. But 30 seconds, like give them 30 seconds. The point is, if you want to give students 30 seconds, you're going to have to time it. You totally have to time it because you will not estimate 30 seconds effectively. You will totally underestimate it. And then something that another technique that you can piggyback on that is saying, okay, take 30 seconds. I'm not going to take any answers for 30 seconds. So you may have an answer right away, but I don't want to hear it for 30 seconds because there's always that guy in the front. I had this guy in my high school math class, and he's this little short guy, and he used to sit on his foot on the chair. Like he's on his chair, and he's sitting on his foot, and he had his hand like this, and he was in the front row. And whenever the teacher asked a question, he would go, and he would like come up off of it, And so he was always the guy that answered the questions, but that left some of us who took a little more time kind of not having the opportunity, kind of like having the one person write all the time in the teal group. So that's a good way to go about that. We talk a little bit about using clicker questions to solicit feedback, and we've used the clickers in this class. We'll use them again. You can get dedicated clickers, these dedicated kind of punch-in things. They use them for teal, I think. Students may have to purchase them. That may cost money. The department may have to purchase them. That's another source of money.
They make us buy everything.
Yeah. So when I was at Brown, actually, they bought the library. The department would buy them, and they'd leave them in the library, and then you could check them out with your student ID, and you got that. So you got it for the semester, but it was linked to your ID, and if you didn't bring it back, they charged you for it. But that's another way to do it. Kind of a fairer way to do it. We'll look at something called Socrative later on. I'll use it later on, but it's a text. It's an online format, so students need a smartphone or a laptop, but they don't need a separate clicker. There are kind of issues with that because not everybody's going to have a smartphone, and then are you sort of biasing your class against people that don't happen to have the technology? This is why I like Plickers, is because you don't need to buy anything. I give you the card, and I need to have the smartphone, but you don't. And then you could always use index cards or do the whole kind of, put one finger up if you think it's A, and 2 if it's B, and 3 if it's C. That gets a little tough in a bigger class because it's hard to see, it's hard to count. I like the fact that the clickers, plickers, and the Socrative or Poll Everywhere give you a histogram. So you get a really quick idea about who's getting it and who isn't getting it. So we're going to do a couple of these. Remember, this is from the labeling the free body diagram, that these misconceptions always linger in a lecture class. We talked about this free diagram the other day. So let's just try this one here. Give you another little warm up on the plickers. So you have the card, and I'm just going to ask you to look at the question. And when you're ready to answer, just hold up your card. And if you can keep your finger away from the pattern, that would be great, because it makes it hard to read it. And then however you want to, okay? It does. I have a colleague who uses it at Brown, and he just started teaching this semester, and he showed me his, a friend, he showed me his plickers, and he printed them out on 8 by 10, like a sheet of paper, cardstock, and they're enormous. I mean, they're like this big, right? I mean, well, they have to hold them up, and you can walk around a little bit, but I'll show you this. All right, so I have the histogram, and I measured everybody. And so now I know what you think about this question. I know who's got it right. I don't know who's got it right, but I know that most of you have chosen the correct answer. Sorry. But that a few of you picked one of the other answers. And so now I know that it's a non-trivial number of you that picked an incorrect answer. So now I know exactly what I need to do, right? It's giving me incredibly good information that there's some of you out there that have a pretty strong misunderstanding of the literature. And that's that some of you picked A, and there's a lot of data to support that that active learning supports, active techniques support student learning. I'll call your attention to the Freeman paper that's in the reading for today, also to the Hake article, which was referenced. So those are two of the more compelling readings, but if you go through, you'll see quite a few studies that unambiguously show that active learning has an impact. So the incorrect answer is that it always involves group work. That's not true. It doesn't always involve group work. As we said, you could just ask students to sit and think and then do something with their thoughts, and that would be active. So Rachel, you're smiling. Is there is it okay? Okay. I didn't know whether it was like a smirk or whatever. And did I show you what this looks like, so you can see what the histogram looks like? I did. You weren't here though when I did. I mean, in the time I used it before. I'll show you offline. So the histogram is really, really useful. Okay. So it really can ferret out some misunderstanding. We don't have to go through all these, but this is another way to check for misunderstanding, right? I can ask this kind of question. It's a concept question. It's a conceptual question. And then I can ask you to pick an answer. And then I can see where your misconceptions lie about this topic. So it can be it should be very, very focused, right? It's not just a busy work question. It's a focused question with focused distractors. The distractors are the incorrect answers.
Can we do this? I want to see what the spread of answers is.
Sure. Let's do it.
They asked this question. I laugh because they asked a very similar question at Harvard graduation.
Exactly. It's what was it called? A world of their own, or
yeah, one of those.
hang on. 2 times. Check. I got to clear my responses. All right. So let's go. So I'm getting you folks in the back without a problem. Oh. I got one, I'm missing one of you. Oh, okay. All right, wow. All right, I'm gonna, so there's any number of things I could ask you. We're gonna do another a pair share around this kind of thing, but maybe not for this one, but this is amazing. That basically it's A got 3 votes, B got 3 votes, C got 4 votes, and D got 3 votes. So it's pretty amazing.
What is the right answer?
Biologist. B. The answer is B, and it's the most kind of maybe not surprising, but the idea that they're taking in things from the air, they're taking in gases, right? And that there's chemical reactions which manifest themselves in a weight gain. Well, it's not a biology class, which is why. So that's just like super telling, right? I mean, that would be incredible if this were a biology class and that was the spread. That would just be really, really informative for the instructor. Well, yeah, that too. But it's not a biology class, so don't worry. But you do want to think very, very carefully about the wrong answers, because you want the wrong answers to tell you something about what students understand or don't understand. Generally speaking, in the adoption of clickers, plickers, whatever, kind of takes a 3-step process. One is that people generally start with these sort of simple fact questions. And then sort of more challenging conceptual questions, which I would put the one we just did at. That students, they arguing with each other could be useful. And then the third is that you've just totally revamped the lecture, and it's all centered around these questions, and depending on how students answer, that's how you navigate through the lecture course or through the class period. I would never recommend that anybody start with this one, right? I think that we're all capable of starting with 2, actually, and I think starting with 3 may be a waste of time, unless you really just want to check and see if people did the reading or something. It's a big class, and you just want to see if they've done the reading. But in general, I would say put your energy into coming up with some really good questions, and maybe don't ask as many. And then as I keep saying that, I hope you can start to see how that's really, really linked. It's a measure of whether they get it, but it's also an activity to help them get it. So I've been monitoring the back channel. Nobody's saying anything except for Dave. And I answered him. And because I gave you a break before, I may scoot on, continue on. Did I put the right one? Yeah. So if you want to take a second login, that's fine, but I may not.
That's the link for last year's.
Oh.
I know because I entered into last year's and I got really confused.
Uh-oh. So the one for this year, is it back here? Hold on.
It's like 4 somethings.
Yeah, hang on.
4125 instead of 3965.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right. So while you're doing that, I'm going to set up something which is called the lightning round. And we're doing these 2, right? All right. So I'm going to just, sitting in your seat, if you can think about this question, just the question on the left. Based on research at NASA, what was the approximate net global change in temperature between 1880 and 1975? It's not a clicker question. It's just a question. Try to think about what you think the answer is.
What is Celsius
To get from Celsius to Fahrenheit? So you have to, well, I was just double it and add 30, right? So 60, it's 8/5 plus 32. 8/5 plus 32, yeah, it's the real equation. Is it 8/5 or 9/5? 9/5. That's why I just double it. Close enough. All right, so what I'm going to ask is that, let's see, David, Gordon, and Julian, if you can move down, just to the end. And then if Adam, Teslim, Dave can come around. Oh, David, right. No, just keep going, keep going. Keep going. That's fine. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you have to stand up, guys. No relaxing. Yes, but that's not, I can tell a story. Okay, please stand up and move over. Move over. Okay, and just keep coming around. Everybody's up. Everybody's doing this. Michelle, so I need 6. Michelle, come on over here next to Teslim. No, that's fine. All right. Now, Xiao you come around here, please, and go opposite David, please. All right. And everybody else, just file in and go opposite someone. Sarah, do you want to participate? All right. So here's what happens. I'm going to tell you to go, and you have 2 minutes. The person in this line takes some amount of time and says what their answer is and why they chose it. And the person in that line can ask questions or whatever, and then say what they thought and say why they thought that. So you're going to have a really quick conversation about your choices. All right? And after 2 minutes, I'm going to tell you to please stop. And then you have to get a new person. Okay? And I'll show you how to do that. Does everybody understand what we're doing? You're having a 2-minute exchange of ideas, and it's going to be loud, believe me. And it's the person opposite you. All right? Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Is everyone ready? All right, on your mark, get set, go.
Why do you think it's a D? Why do you think it's plus 0.4?
Global warming debate.
Because that the temperature will increase after the industrial revolution. Yeah. And I think temperature is too high and on all eggs is too low. Okay. Yeah, I think for me too, I would think you are right. Because
All right, let me ask you a question. Did you encounter people that had different choices than you?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So that generally means it's a pretty good question, right? Because you get to hear lots of different perspectives. Now, if this were the central part of the class, this topic, you might let the pairings go even longer, right? Even more pairings. So did anybody change their mind based on what they heard a partner say? Okay, a couple of you. Generally what happens then is you would want to have it like a debrief where we talk about why you picked the answer you picked and what you picked. And most of the time, the choices are a little bit informative, right? If as the instructor you found out that everybody picked a negative number, well, you're in a very different place than if people are arguing over how much positive it is, right? So you're going to use that information to kind of to find out about where the misconceptions are. What's the advantage of this method? Okay, Gordon.
It's a very interesting method. What I found out is that the students talk to each other, the learners talk to each other, and it's easier for learners to convince fellow learners. So at the beginning, there were a lot of conflicts, but as we kept rotating, there was a convergence. It was very good actually.
Did you want to comment?
Yes.
Put your hand up.
Yes. Like what I observed in this method was very effective and so much likely. When we started, one uses his own personal opinion that this is how it should be. But by the time you interact with people, people come with other idea. You try to look for a superior idea. Then you decide, oh, this is better.
Right.
Then when we try to switch again, you listen to a better argument.
Right.
So from which one decides whether what you have chosen before is right or the left is
Right, yeah, a couple points. One is that it's impossible not to, when you pair people up, it's pretty hard for somebody not to participate, right? That's a very, so if you have somebody that's resistant, I mean, they might still be resistant, but it's virtually impossible for them not to participate. And also it's a little less scary. One person, it's really noisy, you know you only have to talk to them for a minute or two. So it's a little less scary, everybody's doing it. The other thing is that you definitely want to have some sort of debrief. You can't just stop and go, okay, let's go on, right? You're going to have to find out what people's answers are, and you're going to have to try, and you're going to have to address it, or at least reveal the right answer, because there's many places, many places for misconception. And also then, if you do it enough, you can maybe, students can find arguments or people's explanations that they can, that resonate with them. And then that's you get exposed to different kinds of arguments or different kinds of ways of explaining the problem. So in this case, the answer is actually positive 0.4 degrees. So this B is the correct answer. Just so you know.
Yes, I just want to make a comment that sometimes this method could be confusing as well. For instance, if you listen to two superior arguments, one against, for instance, I talked to someone who was actually in support of negative, and he or she brought an argument in support of that, and somebody thought of positive, and there was a strong argument also for that. Right. So sometimes you could just be sitting on the fence and you don't know where to belong.
Well, I think it's okay to be confused for a while. That's fine. As I said, if this were a course on global warming, climate change, whatever it is, we would have to make sure that we heard all of those explanations or a sampling of those explanations and said, oh, well, that's a good, I can see why you think that, but you've forgotten about this, or I can see why, so that you can process it all so that people don't leave confused. But it's good to hear the wrong answer, to be convinced of the wrong answer maybe, but then to see why it's wrong, right? That's an important learning activity.
But this, could it be that this method is only applicable for when you have cases where you can debate? Because if you have very clear cases, for example, if I ask what is the color of the sky,
Sure.
or it's definite, but when it's fuzzy, then it can be.
Yes, or when it's a concept you think people might have difficulty with. Yeah, it's not going to work if it's a real clear cut. I want to demo one more method. This is think, pair, share, and I know we've been doing those forever, but I'm going to couple it with kind of a question, with a clicker question. Okay, and I think we can do it in 7 minutes. All right. So I have 2 blocks here because this is just too fun, really. I have 2 blocks. They're the same width and the same length, but they're a different thickness. And I have this thing. I'm going to tap on the thin block. Makes more or less, it's not really a note, but it's some sound. And I'm going to ask you, when I do the same thing, the same same force, the same place on the thick block, will the note be higher, lower, or the same as the thin block? Okay, and this should be A, B, and C, not 1, 2, and 3. So, but if it's A, B, and C, go ahead and vote with your clickers. Clickers, pluckers. Do you know that's what they autocorrect to? That's what it, if you're typing and you write plickers, it autocorrects to pluckers, which can be pretty embarrassing.
So one I is for A, you've not clicked on the second.
I know. That's why you have to tell me what you think it is.
Is it A, B, and C?
A, B, and C, yeah. A, B, C. So there's no D. Yeah. There's a reason for this. If I told you the answer, then there wouldn't be much fun in voting. And I have everybody. All right. So I have a distribution. I'm not going to tell you the distribution. I'm not going to share that with you. I'd like you to take just cluster. It could be groups of 3 or 4, whatever you have nearby, and talk about why you picked the answer you picked, and then I'm going to give you the opportunity to vote again. So in the interest of time, 2 minutes to discuss this.
I think it's B, but
I want to just call attention to a couple of things I did. I walked around and tried to eavesdrop on your conversations so that I could tell kind of what you were thinking about, but without putting you on the spot, like without asking you to say in front of everybody what you thought. So that's one thing to do. And now I have a sense for your mental models, how you're thinking about the problem. So I have some really good information about why you think the answers you think. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the chance to re-vote. If you want to change your vote, you may, or you don't have to. But let's. Some of the clicker software actually lets you save consecutive histograms, which can be useful. You can compare if there's a change. This doesn't let you do it, so I just have to.
Twice there?
I'm voting for Steve.
Voting in Chicago early and often. And we have exactly the same distribution, which flies in the face of some other data I was going to show you, but that's okay. I'll just, in the interest of, so one thing I could do is I could call on you, and I could say, okay, if you said it was lower, tell me why you thought it was lower. And I could get some arguments for why you thought it was lower on the board. So some people think of sort of cellos make lower sounds than violins. And some people think that doors on mansions have like they have a low sound. And other people talked about we're talking about xylophones and the length and the wavelength of the xylophone, and the longer wavelengths were the longer pieces. So I know a lot about how you're thinking about this problem. The other thing I note is that I am not telling you the answer yet, right? So there's a little bit of suspense in here. There's a little bit of to try to keep you interested and wanting to understand the answer.
Janet? Yes. So you said we had the same distribution, but can we have a show of hands for how many people changed their answer?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. Can raise your hand if you changed your answer. It could have been amazing.
So sometimes we've done that in like my physics classes, and they ask like who changed the answer, and everyone raises their hand. That's the same exact distribution where everyone goes from like A and B to C and D, and even though C and D originally had like 3 people, you'll see the entire shift, and it turns out like A, B was right, and so then like when we voted the second time, we all like picked another answer.
That's very funny. That's funny. But yeah, that could have happened. Sometimes a nice follow-up question is, how confident are you in your answer? Okay. So then that's a really good, because if you get, you may have 80% of the people have the right answer, but if you say how confident, and hardly anybody's very confident, then then you do need to talk about it some more. So it gives you some really, really good information. So here we go. Here's this one. It's higher. Nope, exact same material.
So when you play like the marimba and the xylophone, you have like bigger bars, but they get really thin when they're on like the bass. The bass notes are really thin, and the really small like high notes, they're really, really thick.
So that's one thing. The other thing is that on a xylophone, it's a standing wave because you fix the endpoints, and the wave just vibrates based on the length of the pins, the separation of the pins or the mounts. So in this case, it's a free vibration. So that's another different misconception. And then if you think, so the easiest way to think about it is a diving board. If you had a thin diving board and you kind of went and jumped on it, it would kind of go way down and come back up again. That's a long wavelength, and that's a low note. And then if you think about a stiffer diving board, that you'd be kind of like, that's a shorter wavelength.
Yeah.
So it's different. You have different, and then any kind of a cavity, like a cello or a door of a house, if it's a big cavity, it's a bigger standing wave. It's still a standing wave. So those are very different. They're different models. So this technique is really great because it really gives you incredible insight into what students' misconceptions are, and then you can really make sure to address those misconceptions to deal with their faulty models. So for the post-class assignment, I've asked you to think about what active learning techniques you might adopt for in your own teaching, in your own classes, and then think about how you would adapt them and anticipate any issues or whatever. So hopefully you've gotten a good smattering, and I'll post the slides, which have some links and things in there if you want to look at videos. And also check out that list from University of South Florida, because that has some amazing techniques that you might find useful. I'm going to send everybody off, but if you'd like to comment on the mud cards, I know we're kind of over time. I have them here if you want to make a comment. But otherwise, I'll see you next time. And I'd like the plickers back, the cards back. No.